Hello and welcome back. I say welcome back to Ready Nerd Go. I realize this is the first show we've ever done, and I'm so used to saying welcome back on the other show we have that I just went with welcome back. So I suppose this is the introduction that we're going to do to Ready Nerd Go. I'm going to leave it as it is, and the reason for that is to show you that nothing ever goes as planned in the world of D&D. Ready Nerd Go is going to be graphic policies, D&D tabletop RPG themed show where we talk about people's history with D&D, upcoming D&D game. I say D&D, I'm using D&D as a catch-all. I realize it's not, and I need to be better at that. So we're going to talk about people's history with tabletop RPGs, how they got into them, why they got into them, why they still play them, all of that lovely stuff. We may in future include timestamps to jump to different sections so that you can see where we're talking about different things. I can't guarantee I've done that in this one because I don't know what my plan is honestly going through. Folks, I have spoken for the last minute and I realize I haven't introduced myself. My name's Alex. I'm joined today by Anko,
Hello, hello.
and we're going to talk about tabletop RPGs. I caught myself there, do you hear that? We're going to talk about tabletop RPGs, and we hope you enjoy the ride. And if you don't, then I guess you don't.
One thing I would do want to kind of jump on right off the bat, talking about, trying to be better about saying RPGs rather than D&D is a lot of people really get annoyed at the whole saying D&D for it. But at this point, it's kind of just like Kleenex and tissue. Like if you say tabletop RPGs, the vast majority of people aren't going to understand what you say. If you say D&D, they're like, oh, I've heard of that. It's
The
just
I
easier sometimes.
Oh, 100%. And the irony is, I've often, when I'm working at the comic shop and people say, oh, what are they playing? Oh, D&D. In fact, it's not D&D, it's something, but I don't actually know what it is. And saying D&D, like you said, is the easiest way to describe it to people that don't play what's going on. Now, the irony being in a comic shop, most people coming in will have a vague idea of what you're doing. So folks, audience, people who choose to listen to us on whatever time of day or month this is. As I said, my name's Alex. I am very much not a regular RPG player. I've recently been roped into a couple of games, one of which is being hosted by Anko, and in fact, you've played in all of the games I've been pulled into. So I thought this would make a
Yep.
fantastic first episode.
I mean, I think it'd be fairly accurate to say that I'm the one who pulled you in. So.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think it was I think it was Pathfinder 2E
Yes.
that you were playing, and someone had made a comment of, "Man, I wish we had a goblin." And I look up and said, "Why? Do you need a goblin?" And then it kind of snowballed from there because I ended up creating a murder hobo goblin.
And it was a great little goblin to add to the party.
I It's funny. I enjoy playing now. Again, my experience is woefully limited. The only other time I've played an RPG before that was pre-pandemic, and because it was on a Sunday night, and I started right in the summer, which is right at the time when my wife and I would go out and geocache for all day Sunday,
Hmm.
which meant that it was very difficult for me to commit to a game time. And because in my mind, and be this as it may, because in my mind, well, I've had these recurring plans with my wife long before I joined the game. That's going to be my priority because that's what came first. It
Yeah.
was difficult to get to the game, and inevitably they say, "Hey, you've been to 4 out of the last 10 sessions. Maybe this isn't for you." And I said, "Maybe you're right. I
Well,
enjoyed it,
it's
but
kind of the thing that comes up a lot. When people are asking, well, what's the hardest part about playing a game? It's like, is it learning the rules? Is it remembering what to do? Is it the voices? Like, no, the hardest part of playing the game is organizing the game and actually getting people together.
so and that's what I wanted to ask you about. So when you if I mean, obviously we have a group that we play at a shop.
Yep.
If you don't have a group, where would you start to try and play? If if someone listening to, I want to try one of these games that these guys are talking about, where do I go to start? Where would you suggest?
Well, that's actually changed quite a bit in the last decade because like when I first started playing, if you wanted to play, your options were pretty much entirely limited to trying to convince enough people that you knew to give it a shot or join one of those like play by post who's actually playing by email or Usenet back then. But if you didn't know where to look for those, you were pretty much just shit out of luck. But nowadays, there's so many different ways that you can find to play. Like people will play using Discord. There's a number of forums that still focus entirely on RPG stuff that will have looking for group sections in them. One of the biggest ways people are playing nowadays is through virtual tabletops, which is stuff like Roll20, which is the most popular one, which is just stuff like it simulates a tabletop. You can roll dice. They'll have the rule sets built in for various systems. There's always looking for group sections where you can find people to play. So I would say if you don't have like a bunch of people in person who would be interested, and sometimes people will surprise you with being interested or not, going online to one of those sites is by far the best way to dip your toes in. How's
You
that?
have you have no idea how much I wanted to just start talking off that. I think the issue is for me is I'm so used to just having a conversation that I often let it flow and don't think about it. So the shitty thing is I also realized I completely missed up our flow after the fact.
No, that's all right. I had just finished talking about how going
R20
through stuff
roll
like
20, yeah,
Roll20 and stuff is your best bet to pick up
yeah.
on.
Okay. Um, Anko, I wouldn't worry at all about what you do or don't bring. We're just here to have a chat.
Perfect.
All right. So you found a game on Roll20 because I'm going to assume that someone listening to us may not want to do the legwork to find other people that are interested because in my experience, finding someone who's willing to run the game can be a bit of a hassle. And if you're just looking to start out, maybe Roll20 or friends who are already in a game is a good way to go. What do you need to start the game? Like what did you first bring? So I know I've since picked up more dice sets than I ever thought I would ever own. But beyond that, I've been fortunate because you and the rest of the group have been really good. Oh, hey, this is what you need to build your character. Now that we know how to build it, this is what we recommend. I'm like, great, works for me because I'm more interested in the storytelling than trying to slow up getting everyone going.
Well, the common refrain is all you need is a piece of paper, pencil, and some dice. But since most of it's digital nowadays, you don't even really need that. Like, there's online dice rollers. There's dice rollers on your phone. You can find most of the rule sets are either built into whatever virtual tabletop you're using, or they'll do like what we did with you. And it was like, hey, just give us the idea you want. We'll make it work, and we'll tell you what you need until you pick up the rules. So if you're joining a pre-existing group, the only thing you really need to bring with you is some imagination. Everything else can be provided. And then as you play, if you like it, then you can start picking up the books you want and the dice you want and all that other fun stuff. And trust me, you will pick up so many dice.
I remember the very first session we had, I was using one of the other guys' dice, and that was great. And then I used the same set again the next time, and then I realized, wait, white dice are fun, but these black and purple dice that are sat right next to me and have been for the last 2 weeks, they look even more fun. So I got them, and then I realized that there's going to be a time where I need more than one of these like die that came with it. So I picked up another set. Well, then I lost them at home. I was like, ah, shit. Oh, whatever. I'll just pick. So I ended up picking up two more, and then that's when I'll pick up. Oh, that looks cool. I'll grab that. That looks cool. I'll grab that. I
Yeah,
I
like,
think in my bag I have like 6 sets, 4 sets maybe. I don't know, 4 or 5 sets. It's gonna be a problem.
and you haven't even been playing that long.
I know.
Yeah, it is very much something like, some people do prefer using like dice rollers on their phone, but honestly, nothing replaces just the tactile feel of just having a handful of dice and rolling them.
And I recall we were playing once, and the murder hobo goblin I had. And folks, I realize that I'm new to D&D, and I've picked up some terminology through reading Reddit and being around these guys for the last, what, 5, 6, 7 years?
At least.
And so when I say that I work at the comic shop, they well, every Wednesday come in and play, and it's only recently that they've decided that I'm going to join them. And I often think at this point it doesn't matter what they're playing. Oh, you need a character for this, so I've somehow found my way into the group, and I appreciate that, and it's a lot of fun. But through the years, I was able to pick up different terminology, and when I say a murder hobo, in my mind, it's he's just good at murdering things and doesn't really have much else going on for him. I deliberately play stupid characters because I don't know what I'm doing, and it allows me to explore the I don't know what I'm doing and learn with this idiot goblin. Going back to my point, so I remember rolling a couple of natural 20s in a row, and I had to pull you over to say, I didn't fake this. Look at this. And
Yep.
that's why I like a physical die, is that I can say, no, look, this is what I did. I don't know if that's good, but this is what happened. And the murder hobo stealthed his way through things that should not have been stealthed through, given the fact that he carries a giant, massive club.
Yeah, and it's something. Murder hobo is. I mean, it was originally used as a pejorative term. We've kind of readapted it because, yeah, like I said, it's pretty much just means a character that has like no real backstory or personality or connection to the world. They just run around and kill things and loot, never really set down anywhere. So,
That it's interesting you said that. I had no idea it was a pejorative term. It's
Yeah,
still
no, because
very applicable to the goblin, but
yeah, it's one of those things, kind of like when quote unquote real role players will complain about people just playing murder hobos, but they're just different styles of game. Like
and
it might not be what you're into, but there's nothing wrong with just playing characters that are just running around and looting and killing and moving on because it's a game.
and the thing is, and this is actually an interesting thing to pivot off to. How much role playing is actually involved in a tabletop RPG?
The glib answer is however much you're comfortable with. But to give a little more detail on that, it's like there's a few different ways people will generally fall into when it comes to role playing in RPGs. You have the people who like playing in first person. They will speak, using I do this, and I want to see this, and they will like they might take on like voices or personality tics, or like they really try to bring the character to life, almost like improv theater. Then you will have the players who speak more in third person, like my character does this, and then my character responds like this. And they might not be as, into the voices and the like getting into the character, but they still, have the character that they're acting out. They're just acting it out, in the third person narrative. And then you'll have people who just treat the character like an extension of themselves, where they will use first person pronouns, but they're not speaking as the character. They're just speaking as themselves using the tool that is their character to explore. So like, you could say like, well, I'm going to go knock down that wall. You're not saying that in character. It's you as the player saying, hey, I'm going to take my character and go knock down that wall.
When you first started playing, has your style of how you role play changed over the years? Have you found what works for you and stayed into it?
It's definitely changed. When I first started playing, it was very very more timid about trying to like get into the head of whatever character I'm trying to play, because like generally when you first start playing, you generally have an idea of what you think is cool that you want to try, whether you want to play the brutish barbarian or the magical wizard or what have you. You generally have some idea of, hey, I think this is cool and this is what I want to do. But when you first start, at least for me, it was more of a general, like, hey, I like this concept of, like, the wizard or whatever, but I don't really have a character in mind for it. And then, that just kind of happens. While nowadays, I'm much more frequently, I should say, I'm much more frequently in the vein of, like, hey, I have this general idea of this type of person I want to play. It's more based around, like, their, how can I describe this? Their question, like the question that character revolves around. Because, like, for when I first started out, it was, hey, I want to play a wizard and just go raid dungeons and stuff. And now it's like, okay, what's the central conflict I want this character to kind of have around them, and then I can build the character to match that. Like, for an example, in the game that we first pulled you into, where you're playing the goblin, the character that I'm playing is actually the child of another character from a previous game, and the whole idea behind that character was kind of like, hey, what would somebody look and act like if they had, been born into and raised in that kind of environment? And then all of the character decisions around building them kind of revolved around, okay, how can I best express who I think this character would be, more than, hey, I want to play a wizard.
I had no idea that at the time when we started playing. In fact, I still don't think I knew. I had no idea that it was the son of a previous character. But I think that also plays into how you're telling your story, or the story for your character, as much as the game master, dungeon master. I realize the terms can be interchangeable, but
Yeah.
in the efforts of trying to not use D&D as the all-out descriptor, and I will get better at that, folks. The game master is also telling their story. When so I've got two thoughts here, and I will try and touch on both of them. When I first played D&D, and it wasn't with your group, I played with a group that had clearly been playing for years, in at least a decade or more. Like, I would say that they were probably my age now, in their 40s or coming up to their 40s, and had been playing for quite a while together. So I joined not really knowing what to do, and all of a sudden all these different voices are coming at me. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on, and I don't know if I'm allowed to ask what's going on at this current moment in time.
It can
So
definitely be a bit overwhelming when you first hop into an established group, because everybody already has, their relationships build up and they know what to expect from each other as players. So hopping into that right off the cuff can be intimidating.
and I think that's where your group was so wonderful, because some of you do tend to throw the voices out, some of you don't, and in no way, shape, or form do I feel like I have to do one or the other. And given that I don't know what I'm doing, like when the Pathfinder 2E DM was eating, like, hey, can I do this? And like, well, yeah, why not? Let's try it.
Yeah.
And then when we play the Lancer game that you're running, in which, again, drastically different system,
Hmm.
I gave you an idea. Hey, I want to play a character that does this, this, and this. And like, great, here it is. I then just hey, am I allowed to do this? Can I do this? And like, yeah, sure, why not? Or,
Yeah.
you can't do that. So I have no issues asking, because you folks have no issues helping me through. The the second point I was going to get to is, when someone's looking for a new group, and I guess I'm focusing more online now, and I don't know if you play online as much, but when they're looking for a new group, is there anything they need to be aware of when searching the websites for, hey, I have no experience, what the hell, I want to play, but I have no idea what I'm doing? Or should they just, hell with it, I'll go feet first in and hope for the best?
Yeah, so I've tried online role playing. It's not really my thing. Some people it works amazing for. I really prefer and thrive on that like in-person connection. But as far as like when you're finding new groups, whether online or off, there are a few just kind of general things to be aware of. The first one is that it's especially easier in online groups that are open to new players, like new to the hobby players, will usually advertise as such, and those are tend to be really good ones to get into because then the players that you're joining will know to expect somebody who might not be super comfortable role playing or might not have a firm grasp on the rules or even what a d20 is, and so those can be a lot easier of an onboarding experience for people. There's definitely God, if I start getting into like red flags and RPG groups, I might prattle on for like an hour. But generally speaking, an adage that tends to come up a lot is that no gaming is better than bad gaming. If you try a group and you're not enjoying yourself, don't feel like you need to stick with it. There's plenty of other groups out there, especially if you're playing online. Everybody has different play styles. Some of them won't mesh together. Some people won't mesh together. There's nothing wrong with looking around until you find a good group. And as long as you can just say, hey guys, I'm sorry, this isn't working out for me, and bow out, you'll eventually find a group that works for you and have a much better time than trying to stick with a group that you feel like you need to stick with just because, it's all you can find.
An addendum to that too is I've seen when you guys play different games in the shop, there's inevitably at some point there's someone, you know what, I'm not super into that game. I think I'm gonna bow out for this session and
Yeah.
come back when you try something else. Now, I think from my experience, and this is entirely anecdotal and reading online and everything, your you folks tend to play whatever game you want to play at any given time. So you do a module. So I assume, and again, I'm not super clear on this. I assume that say, hey, this is like to borrow a video game parlance, this is a mission. We're going to do this level. Then maybe we'll switch to something else. So there's never really any dedicated. We're playing this game for the next year and a half. And if you don't like it, well, we'll see you in a year and a half. It's, oh, hey, you don't want to play that game? Okay, no worries. We'll see you in a week, or we'll see you in a couple of weeks when we're back up.
Yeah,
Do
that
something
is
else.
that is one of the reasons that I like sticking with the Wednesday group, because like normally, and this is actually an addendum to what we were saying about earlier, finding a group. Typical group sizes for RPGs tend to float between like the game master and like 4 or 5 people as like the players in the world. That's generally kind of the sweet spot for being able to balance everybody getting their fair share of the spotlight and actually being able to engage and play with the game. Our Wednesday group is definitely on the larger side of games. One of the reasons that it does tend to work for us is because we're cycling through a whole bunch of different systems. So everybody is, very experienced with picking up new systems and kind of just making sure we have the time and focus to do what we need to do. But I mean, well, actually, thinking back, I guess we should clarify, because if we are expecting people who don't really know RPGs to be listening to this, one clarification to get into: Pathfinder is a system that's kind of like D&D. It is a similar like fantasy genre with swords and wizards and all that fun stuff. There's a whole bunch of history about how it spun off from an earlier edition of D&D that's not really relevant, but suffice to say, Pathfinder is a fantasy RPG. Lancer, the one that I most recently ran, is a mech RPG, so like big robot suits punching each other, which is something to bring up. And a lot of people, because they associate RPGs specifically with D&D, is that they think oh, it's all fantasy and swords and sorcery. While RPGs can be in literally any genre you want to be. We've played RPGs based on the Aliens franchise. We've played them based on the Fallout franchise. We've played fantasy and westerns and sci-fi and modern urban fantasy and just anything that you can tell a story in, you can play an RPG in, and there's thousands of systems out there, and you can find one that does what you want it to do.
To expand upon what you said about a system, when you
Yes.
say system, you don't system and setting are not the same, not the
No. Oh, yes.
same thing. So, because I realized that you're right, we didn't touch on what a system was, and then so delving a bit deeper into that,
Yeah. So,
I'll give my oh no sorry yeah I say I said I could give my best explanation on it, but I think it makes a lot more sense for you to do that because you're only going to correct me anyway.
well, it is always interesting to get somebody like an outsider's opinion on what they think it is, because that's like, how well have we communicated these concepts
All
to
right,
you?
so hey, let's do it then. So when I first started listening to your play, it didn't occur to me that there's a different way of playing. So Alien, for example, has I think I've only needed to use two different types of dice, right? Like I think I haven't needed to roll initiative. So
Hmm.
when I say roll initiative in Pathfinder, when an encounter starts up, you roll your d20, and whoever gets the highest number goes first. I enjoy that because it allows for some interesting storytelling as you're going through. The Alien game, you draw cards, and it's whoever gets the lowest number goes first. Again, it still allows for some interesting storytelling, but you don't then have to, well, Alex got an 18, Anko got an 18. How do we decide who goes first? And then you can story it out. In this case, it's, well, Alex drew a 2 and Anko drew a 10, so Alex is going first, unless you want to switch, which I thought was a really interesting mechanic in that you can switch your card so you can jump up your turn. And then on top of that, so Pathfinder has the D20, D10, 12. I'll always remember when I said, which one's a D10? And someone's like, the one with 10 sides. That's a very valid answer. And I open myself up for it. But I meant in my mind, like, what shape is a D10? Because I couldn't picture which one it was without counting all the sides.
It's a spinny
Um,
top.
exactly. And that's just it. So that's how I started to differentiate. Well, the D20 is the big one. The 4 is the triangle, right? So
Yep.
you do figure out how it goes. The D4, ironically enough, was the one I had the hardest time reading because I couldn't work out, well, when it lands, all three sides are pointing up, but then I realized the number is actually on the top and not on the bottom.
Yeah, see, the D4 is actually really interesting in that, because some D4s will put the numbers on the corners, others will put them on the edges. So whether you read the top or the bottom of the die depends on where they print the numbers. So yeah, it can be a confusing one to read.
Yeah, that's fun. Okay. So again, getting back to systems, because
Yes.
I'm drifting us off, and that's what I'm used to doing. The system itself, it's each one is not always different from each game. I've seen you folks say, oh hey, it uses parts of this system, but it also adds this. So I think it's more a case of, again, it's much like board games. It uses part of the Monopoly rules, but also then adds in a bit of clue. Is how I've been looking at it, and how accurate am I on that
I mean,
poor assessment?
you're fairly on the nose with it, because generally, a system or rules system is just like the collection of rules that that particular game uses. Because it's calling it a game is a bit of a misdemeanor, I personally think. It's more of like, it's a game. It's it's a system that you use to play the game. It's not the game itself. Like D&D is a collection of rules that you use to play the game. D&D isn't really the game itself, because like you can use, if you wanted to. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but a lot of people do. D&D is a system that the rules are built around like playing really powerful fantasy characters. You could use that same rule set and play like sci-fi characters or modern characters or whatever you want. It would take a lot of modification, but you could do it. I wouldn't personally recommend it, but I know a lot of people that do, and not yucking their yum on that.
No, and I think I've always looked at it. or I have recently begun looking at it more as in the rule system, the system or the rules, however folks are used to identifying it as. It's more a guide to allow the DM, GM to tell the story. And it's I remember years ago, and I'm sure I've told you this, but I used to play post RPG game like online. I would write a post on a
Yeah,
forum. You would write a
play
post.
by
No,
play by post is generally what it's called.
yes, you said that earlier, and it went out of my mind. But there was no dice rolling involved. It was just I always looked at it as a collective storytelling, and
Yeah,
that's how I still look at RPG games today. Is it's a collective storytelling. In person, it's facilitated by dice rolls, by rule systems, and yet every GM. Like, I remember we were one of the first sessions I had. We were had to get our characters over a crowd to fight something, and my first question was, "Can the orc throw me?" And like, we don't know how to do that, but that's awesome. Let's figure it out. And
yeah,
we're able to puzzle out what Well, it'll be a strength roll to throw it. You'd have to throw an agility roll to land. See what you did. Fuck it, let's do it. And
yeah.
and that's the kind of thing that I hesitate to use the rule of cool, but that's absolutely what it is in many cases. It's I don't know if we can do it technically in the rules, but as a GM, I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm gonna let it happen. How do I let it happen?
Yeah, because that's most systems will explicitly codify this, but it's just generally a thing of the hobby. Is there's always rule zero, which is just the rules can be pretty much changed as needed. They're guidelines because they're there to help mostly like enforce tone of genre. Because like actually a good example with the Aliens RPG, they have a stress die mechanic, which is like as your character goes through stressful things, they build up this pool of things that makes them more capable, but it also makes them more likely to freak out and run, which is something that's really valuable for the horror sci-fi that Aliens is. The dice are there to reinforce the themes of the genre.
I had a point to make, and it's just completely gone out the window. It'll either come back or it won't. When it, I remember, I'm gonna deliberately tell an anecdote while I try and recall it. One of the games that you folks are playing, I believe it's Twilight 2000, which is a post World War II game in which it's set in the late 90s, early 2000s, after the Cold War went awry, and you're playing as folks from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, someone from the States, and the owner of the shop said quite loudly, "I just want to kill more Russians." And at the time, this was just as the war in Ukraine had kicked off, and someone had walked into the shop, heard that, froze, didn't realize there was a game being played because it looked like to them, and from the angle they were at, it looked like you were just sitting around a table talking, because at the time in the game that's what you were doing. So there wasn't any dice being thrown, and
Yeah.
they just froze. And I looked at them, looked at you, said, "They're playing a game set in the Cold War, and ironically, one of the characters is Ukrainian and does want to kill Russians, but that
Yeah.
has very little bearing on what's actually going on in the world."
Yeah. I remember
And
we had we had started shortly before that war kicked off, and when that when that whole debacle did start and they did all the invasion and crap, we had a bit of a moment of like, is this should we be playing this right now? This doesn't really feel like something we should be playing right now because it's like also actively happening in the world.
and I think that's one of the. I feel like that's more of a rare occurrence and not because people don't typically expect, oh, hey, well, we're going to play a game where Cthulhu's involved and
Yeah.
it's set in the 30s. Well, it's very unlikely that Cthulhu is going to become involved in world events today. It's
Yeah.
very unlikely that we're going to go to space in our lifetime and see an alien face hugger, right? So there's always going to be an element of fantasy, science fiction to these games. It's just that when there's an alternate history that suddenly becomes uncomfortably close to where we are today, it's a question that I'm sure doesn't come up much, but in this case did. When someone's creating a character, I'm gonna pivot back to this because this is what
Yep.
I always find interesting is when they're creating a character, and you touched on this a bit with Rule Zero. Session Zero, it's a term that I've heard thrown around, and I've heard some folks say, "Oh, we create our characters in Session Zero." Do you do you personally come to a Session Zero with an idea of the character you want to play in mind? Do you have it fully created and then fleshed a backstory out in a Session Zero?
Yeah, so that's it. All of my answers are going to have the tag of different people do it differently.
Yeah,
But for me, like, and I guess taking a step back to explain, session zero is not
I'm so
something that
glad you did
every
that.
group does. What session zero is it's explicitly like the pretty much the pre-game session where we generally either know what system we're going to play or have a fairly good idea of what out of a selection we want to play. And then we'll all get together, and some of us will come with ideas of the character we want to play. Some of us will just come in with just the rule book and an open mind, because the whole idea behind session zero is pretty much just making sure everybody's on the same page with the type of game we want to play, and making characters that both we want to play and that are appropriate for the game. And that's not just like setting wise, like it's not just make sure you don't bring a wizard to a sci-fi game. It's a tone thing too. Like if the game that we want to play is about playing heroic people who are going out and saving people out of the goodness of their hearts, somebody showing up with an absolute vile person who's only out for themselves is not an appropriate tonal fit for the game. And that's what session zero is good at, either nixing or adapting. Because like I've played evil characters in good games, but they had like a reason to be with the group and helping the group succeed. Like it wasn't just oh, I'm playing an evil character and I'm just gonna ruin everyone's fun. No, it was, this character is evil, but he has reasons for helping the party, so people can actually, like, as players, sit back and enjoy the game. So session zero is really helpful for making sure that everybody's on board with the game we are going to play, and that everybody has characters that can work together. Not even necessarily like the characters getting along, but like the players can make these characters work together.
Another follow up to that is I know for one of the characters that I think it's in Lancer, one of the characters or the character that I'm playing that you helped me create, there's a very deliberate theme to what he's trying to do in the game that I haven't really told the rest of the guys about. And yet there are some things within the Alien game that's also being played concurrently. One of the guys has a character that's basically a genetically engineered freak who's effectively the Terminator is how I view it, but the rest of the characters don't know it, but we as players do.
Yeah, and that's touching on character versus player separation of knowledge, which, once again, different groups.
Yeah.
But generally, how I prefer to play it is that having, when the players know your character's secrets, but their characters don't, it lets you, adapt and play your character in a way that supports that. Like if if like say your character is playing, like the hidden prince of a kingdom or something, and my character doesn't know that, but I do, then I as a player can riff on that and play into the story that you're trying to tell without my character necessarily knowing about it, because that separation of, like, what I know versus what my character knows, I can have my character do things that relate to it one way or another and help reinforce the character you want to play, but not necessarily having my character know what's going on themselves.
And see, that's an interesting point you bring up, because as we've gone on and played Lancer with the character that I have, and I've watched Alien be played with not just the eye of, oh, this is a cool story being told, but the mechanics of how the game's being played. For me, I realized it would have made more sense, and there's always time to adjust this. It would have
Mm.
made more sense to say, hey guys, this character has this that he wants to do.
Yeah,
Because I think that, to your point, it makes more sense when the players understand, so that they can play into it, or put their characters in a situation where you can, as the guy with the secret or the gal with the secret, can expand upon that a bit more.
and
Whereas
like
if
that's
you don't know, then you don't know.
that point that also kind of points to one of the biggest I don't want to call it schisms in tabletop gaming, but it's an appropriate word for it. And like how player versus character knowledge works, it tends to there's a few different ways that people approach the gaming as a whole, like even outside of what system you're playing. And there's the, the terms change constantly and their meanings change constantly. So what I say might not be accurate current terminology, but there's people who like play go in saying, hey, this is the type of story we want to play, and like we want to play like this is the general beats we're expecting to hit in the story. And then there's the people who go in with okay, I have I know barely anything about what's going on going in, and the story is just going to emerge strictly from what happens at the table. Like if it doesn't happen at the table, it doesn't exist. While some people could go in like your character with what he wants to do in Lancer in the first, it would be like people would know that and generally expect that like at some point he's going to have this moment and that's going to happen because that's like the character arc you're trying to experience with that character. While in the latter, people wouldn't know about it, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't, and that's just the story that emerged at the table.
And that's just it. Like I enjoy both aspects, and I think that with the character that I'm playing in Lancer, it makes as much sense to have it quiet, because it's not like it's a game changing thing.
Yeah,
Whereas with the the character who is essentially Terminator, makes more sense to say, hey, this is what the character is. This is why he's so durable. Because otherwise, you might have people who do min max their characters to the biggest. Wait, why can you do that and I can't? That makes no sense. And
exactly.
then if there's a reveal that someone's trying to make, it's almost blown in that tabletop moment. And I think that you said earlier, and I think it bears repeating, that no D&D or no RPG is better than bad RPG. I had read where someone had a character like that who was supposed to be the turncoat or double agent or
Oh,
whatever, and the DM knew, but it was decided that they would keep it quiet. And then at the end, I think that person became the big bad of the entire story.
yeah.
And I thought, like, the way they explained it, that was fantastic. And then someone said, "Oh, that was really great. When we tried to do that, my DM didn't try and keep it quiet, so the player was trying to puzzle out and essentially ruin the game for everyone else in session 3, because they
Yeah, and that's
couldn't
oh
work it out." And I think that I can hear your rage get going.
god.
Is how impactful is a DM to the game? Like, you have people that are, quote, the forever DM, that will only ever DM a game. But how impactful is a DM, like, in terms of, if they're, I mean, it's going to be, I think it's self-explanatory, a bad DM is a bad DM, but how?
So the GM is kind of is best described as the final arbiter at the table, because like they I mean in world they depending on the system, but generally in world they control everything that's not the player characters, and they are the ones who have the final decision on what does and doesn't happen. I need to touch back on what you're talking about, like having the hidden traitor in the group. That is something that can be really fun to do, but is also really easy to do very badly, because like everybody wants to play the character with like the secret and like the, oh, we're gonna catch everybody like this. But what you need to remember, and what a lot of people don't really think about, and what catches up a lot of people in bad gaming, is that like as long as you think it'll be fun for the other players, it can work. But you need to remember that the whole point of the game in the end is that everybody at the table should be having fun. And if your big secret surprise or twist or whatever is something that you don't think the other players are going to enjoy, or you're trying to do it to like deliberately get one over on them, it's probably not going to go well, and you probably shouldn't do it.
It's funny you say that because at the end of the day, I know we were talking about how the rules aren't the game and the game isn't the game, but it is something that we as people play these games as part of the social interaction to get your creativity needs met for whatever reason. Maybe you need an escape from real life, and then you go and you have this is a great twist, and you realize halfway through no one's enjoying it.
Yeah, and that's something that kind of falls. Yeah, there's a lot of argument and history in that one.
There's history here that we don't have to touch on.
Yeah, so because it does ultimately boil down to, is everyone at the table, engaged and enjoying what's happening at the table? Because like it's one of the biggest things in it's something that should go be happening in session 0 is people deciding this. Is PvP okay? Like, is the expectation at the table that your characters can get into like schisms and fights with each other, and like actually have like party destroying arguments, or is the general expectation that your characters will find a reason to get along? Because if you don't establish that right off the bat, and you have somebody who wants to do PvP and somebody who doesn't, then nobody at the table is going to have fun. And
Agreed.
we've had that a couple of times where PvP moments did happen in our group at various points, and generally speaking, we don't do PvP. But we've had moments in the game where like for example, like me and the character, the player who's playing the super mutant and aliens, it's like our characters in the game are friends with each other, but they have ideological differences. That means that at some point, one of them is going to try to kill the other.
And I think
And
that's something that you two have spoken openly about, and you know it's coming, and
yeah,
you've also almost tacitly acknowledged that the outcome is almost predetermined.
yeah, yeah, because like his character is a genetic super mutant
And
monster of combat, and mine's a wimpy little tech guy. So odds are good my character is going to be the one that dies in this. But
yeah, odds are good. But again, that maybe the dice will be on your side that day.
exactly, like things could upset. My character could somehow get the drop on his character. Highly unlikely, but when the inevitable confrontation happens, it's going to be because me and that other player have agreed above the table that, yeah, this is when this should happen, and let's see where the dice fall.
I remember we played a session. I don't know if you were there. You're so that in the Pathfinder game we're playing, my character has, for whatever reason, decided that you are the commander and he will listen to you regardless.
Hmm.
But you weren't there, and something was happening, and my reaction was, "Oh, Ben would attack this, and we would try to murder it based on previous experiences. And the last time we saw a flaming thing, everyone tried to kill it. He's preemptively going to try and do the same."
Yeah.
I thankfully rolled low on initiative that time because the rest of the party did not want to kill it. And so they had to then use half of their rolls to stop me from doing that. And as it turned out, the right answer at the time, or the best option we would have had in hindsight, would have been to attack and kill it. But I I said, look, I'm fine with you doing whatever you need to do, but they nudged, they tried to do everything to stop it until like I ran out of my turns basically.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that, but I was also happy that no one tried to actively murder Ben, because again, like that's not the nature of it. And I think that was more of a, this is where me as the player acknowledges that the character isn't gonna follow the group because he's not really a huge part of the group. He's just there. And again, like you said, I'm aware that the end result is going to be that this attack isn't going to succeed, and we all kind of came together to work out in a much more gentle way than perhaps someone saying, "Oh, well, I disagree. I try to I attack you with and roll a natural 20 and murder someone." So
Mm.
it's like you said, PvP can be fun if everyone agrees to it, and even in games where there is no PvP, there's going to be times when characters will come to blows. And I think that having established that no one's trying to actively murder them, other players in session zero, allows you to find a different resolution. Like in real life, who knew that you're not going to try and actively murder someone? That yes, maybe you'll come to blows, we'll have an argument. It's a fantasy setting, so maybe more fists would be thrown. Like if you and I had a disagreement in real life, we talk it through.
Yeah.
In a game, or maybe you're quicker to throw fists and resolve it that way.
Because
But
your character has their own personality that can just
exactly,
influence who it is.
and that's just very true. Like you have more of a say over what they are and they're not going to do.
Because it's interesting. 'Cause it's one thing that I've started, 'cause as you had asked earlier, how do I like make and play my characters different now from when I used to, and it's I like to have, because all characters in one sense or another are either you expressing a part of yourself or you exploring a concept that you're interested in. And for me, like exploring concepts that I'm interested in is what I try to bring to each character that I'm playing. Like, who, like what type of person in this scenario, what would they do? And that's kind of what I'm interested in exploring at this point. But sometimes it's also just, hey, I want to play, tiny little wrestler who can throw dragons around. And those are both perfectly valid concepts, but you approach who that is as a character differently. And for like the latter, it's a lot easier for the character to kind of be nudged and adjusted to who they need to be at the moment. But if I'm playing a character who's asking a philosophical question at the core of it, there's going to be times when there's just disagreements in character that can't be resolved in character. And as long as the players aren't like hostile to each other, the characters can be as hostile to each other as
Mhm.
you want because they're not you.
Absolutely, and I think that one of the core things I hope folks take away is that there's no wrong way to create the character, to come up with and create the character. Like I've come up with, of the 3 games that we're playing, the
Yep.
Pathfinder character I came up with. Hey, okay, so I know he's going to be a goblin. I don't know what I'm doing, so he's going to be really dumb. And for whatever reason, I decided he was going to be a dentist because
Yep.
I've seen like the shop owner will often play a medic or an apothecary or someone like that in the game. Like that's a really cool thing, that this is a character and this is why they're on the road or joining the rest of the adventurers. So I enjoyed that aspect of, this little goblin dentist has a giant club. Why is he going with them? Oh, hey, one of the other characters is an orc with giant tusks. The dentist collects teeth.
Yeah, like that one little idea of, hey, I want him to be a dentist ended up sprawling out and affecting the entirety of who the character was because it just you naturally extrapolated on that idea once, you had it and started playing with it. And that's one of the biggest fun things to do with RPGs is just having this core idea that you expand upon and extrapolate on and just see where it takes you.
And that's just it. And then conversely, the Lancer game, the entire point of the character is to build towards one specific event that at some point is going to be relevant to the story. I haven't really done much with the character itself because I find Lancer it seems to have been more of a battle, which
Yeah, well,
I thoroughly enjoy how the Lancer combat works. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Um, you would start to
yeah,
say something and I cut you off.
yes, no, that's fine. It's just I wanted to expand on what you're saying about how it seems to be more combat focused. That is something that the rule systems also can, reinforce and push. And it's like, what type of gameplay is going to be focused on? Because like most of the systems that we played are they have a fair amount of the rules are devoted to combat and how to fight things. And so when we get into combat, we have all of these nice crunchy rules to play with and like expand and like show who our unique character is expressed through the rules. But then in something like Lancer, which has very rules light stuff for, the RPing and pilot side of things, our table specifically doesn't really get into that side of as much with this system because we're playing the system to play with the rules, and most of the rules are centered around the big crunchy mech combat, which is where you'd want it in a system like that.
I, absolutely, like you play a mech game ostensibly to murder things with giant mechs, and it's so much fun seeing how that goes through, and yet at the same time, because my character in Lancer is very much not of the core squadron. He was added in later, so he's going to be more of an outsider. When I'm in the combat, I'm trying to think, well, what would I do to further my goal as opposed to help the rest of the squad? Because ultimately, he doesn't care about the rest of the squad as much.
Yeah.
And there has been at least one instance where that cost us as a group because he was more interested in killing something than achieving the end goal.
Yeah, and because the players are on board with that of like, hey, your character is part of functionally a different faction. He's not always going to be as focused on the core group's goals because they are playing they are part of a different faction than he is. Like, okay, yeah, this cost us this secondary. This cost us the primary objective of
It
that fight.
was. It
But it was
absolutely
like,
was.
okay, it was okay. It's like, yeah, we lost the primary objective of this fight, but what you did made sense in character, and it wasn't you, Alex, being malicious towards the other players and being like, oh, I'm just going to mess things up and disrupt them. It was like, no, this is this is the only thing that makes sense for my character to do. Having him stopping do this and going off and securing the objective doesn't make sense for him.
No, and I think that's where the storytelling of RPGs comes into play. Is that yes, you can get folks who min max and play to win.
Yeah.
I I've preferred over the games I've played that, and especially watching your play it, is when you do what's right for the character, which is somehow inevitably a terrible idea for the rest of the game in the long run. For example, I remember someone said, "Oh, you've got this. You can get this. This will make your character so much better." I'm like, be that as it may, there is no reason for my 3.5 foot tall goblin dentist to want that. Like, it just wouldn't interest him. I would love it as a player, but
Yeah.
there's no. I cannot conceive of a way that the dentist would pick up anything that isn't something that's designed to either knock someone unconscious so he can harvest their teeth or chop off the head so that he can get the teeth easier that way. Like, there's no way I could conceive that he would have it. So we ended up going with arguably the worst option of the three, I think. But it
But
made
it
sense
was
at
the
the
most
time.
fun.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how you phrase that too, because you said, what's best for the characters. Like mechanically, him not taking that And like even like in setting, him not taking that was not in his best interest, but it's what made sense for who the character was. Like it wasn't so much what was in his best interest as in who he is. This is what he do, whether it's in his specific best interest or not.
Absolutely,
Because
and
it was
I
like
think when it
yeah, go.
no, carry on, carry on.
Yeah, because like what's in the best interest, and some people will have a conniption about playing this way, but it's like it's what's in the best interest of the story of this character is not necessarily what's in the best interest of that character. Like what's in the best interest of the story of my character in Lancer is probably him dying a horrific death to his best friend. That's not in his best interest, but that's probably where his story is going to lead if
Be-
nothing else changes. And if nothing at the table causes that to change, I'm not going to try to come up with some reason out of character of like, oh no, we can't do this. I don't want to lose him. It's like, okay, no, this is where things have been leading. This is where I've been helping and letting them lead. This is what's going to happen because it's the most interesting.
I've watched you essentially kill a character because that's what he would do, sacrifice himself nobly, despite the fact like I don't want to lose a character, but I can't find a way that he wouldn't do this. So
Yep.
that's where the story leads, and for me, it almost goes against how I would have expected players to play, especially when I'm relating it to board games or video games. You do everything you can to keep yourself alive, and this is where the magic of RPGs come in. Is that you're servicing the character. You're For me, and your opinion may differ, but you're servicing the character story first, and then the table story second. As
Yeah, I
long
mean,
as it doesn't put you at complete and utter odds with the rest of the players, like in an out of game thing, like hey, it makes more sense for my character to do A. I realize that if I do A, most of us will die. I'm going to do A. I need you to think of how to convince me to do B in advance so that we're not gonna carry on, or we're not gonna have a total party
yeah, 'cause,
killed.
it's when like people will have different levels of like just how collaborative they are in where the story is going and how their characters are being played. And like we tend to play in a more collaborative style where you said like, hey, it makes most sense for my character to do this, but this is going to have horrible impacts on what's currently happening. Is there any, what would your characters be able to do, or what would they might possibly do to like mitigate or prevent that from happening? And that's not a discussion that's happening like in the world with our characters. That's a discussion that's happening above the table where the players are having that discussion like, hey, where can we bring this story in a way that doesn't just destroy everyone's enjoyment? How can we keep doing this while keeping everybody engaged and enjoying themselves?
And that's just it. And I think that goes back to what we had touched on with Ben attacking when the rest of the party didn't want to. Is that I was straight up, this is what's going to happen. How do you stop me?
Yeah, 'cause
And
like you had mentioned earlier, your goblin Ben tends to follow my character around right now and kind of view him as like the authority figure at the moment. And my character isn't all too fond of the goblin. Like he explicitly thinks that he's a murder hobo that needs to stop killing everything. But I, as a player, absolutely love that character interaction because
it's
it allows me to explore like, hey, how would this character react to somebody like this who is like looking up to him, but at the same time is just blatantly not doing what he would prefer he would do.
it's a lot of fun because you get the different interactions of like, or like you said, how do you play it in a way that you're really enjoying the interactions and you want them to continue, but the character really doesn't.
And
And
sometimes that does involve like taking a step back above the table and saying, hey, I'm not like I am not upset by what's happening.
Mm.
My character is. I want to see this continue.
And I think we're going to start touching on red flags if we go down this route. And I'd love to have a part two where we do touch on red flags for folks who are getting into the game, because I think that's also important to know. But
Yes.
it comes down to the fact that as adults and as people physically in a room together, and I would argue as friends prior to playing the game, at least in our case,
Mm.
is that we're able to have the discussion of, hey, Ben's going to do this. Your character's not going to like it, but it's still going to happen. And you
Yeah.
can be like, oh God, and then enjoy the experience as it carries on. Like we had spoken a bit earlier about how your character, or Ben, had stealthed his way through something. It was to interrogate a prisoner, and he just walked through. Whereas you're trying the official route because Ben heard your character say, "We need to talk to him." He's like, "Okay." Doesn't know any different. Goes through, gets the information, comes back, leaves the guy in a terrified heap, and you're like, I I don't know how to feel right now that the murder hobo didn't murder someone and did what we asked him to do in the most stupid way possible, but got results.
It's like my character is mortified by what just happened, and as a player, I'm like, that was amazing.
It it was honestly, it remains one of my favorite moments that I've played in D&D, other than the time that I somehow I did a critical success in the previous game of a barbarian hiding behind a rock in what was essentially a nuclear explosion, deliberately designed to have a total party kill so they could reset.
Yep.
And the barbarian survived, and we're like, what the fuck happened? Like, how do you explain that? And the guy's like, he hid behind the rock. I'm like, works for me. It's one of those moments where like the dice don't lie. The dice in many ways dictate the outcome of the events, and they can lead to some of the best and most awful results possible. And that's, for me, that's where the fun comes in, is that I'm trying to go straight. I need to roll above, like, I need to roll 1, 2, or 3 on a d6 to do that, and a roll of 4. So then as a DM, you're like, how do I make it so he doesn't walk straight? Because there's no logical reason why. I just thought the roll would be funny. And so now you've got to come up with a reason as to why he's weaving in and out and somehow doing whatever you need to do. And I think that the magic of tabletop RPGs and RPGs, I say interchangeable in this case, is
Hmm.
that the shitstorm that comes from a poor dice roll is often way more entertaining than what can happen from a good dice roll.
Yeah, because that's it's conflict is what builds stories. Like it's if there's never any downturn, if you're reading a book and nothing bad ever happens to the main characters, it's a boring book that you're probably not going to enjoy. And when you're playing a game, it can be really hard, especially when you're first getting into the hobby. It can be really, really hard to willingly say, hey, I'm going to let this bad thing happen to, my viewpoint character, the character that I've probably put a lot of work into making up who they are and literally building them in the rules and all of that stuff. And the dice allow you to be able to do that because it's not, oh, I'm going to let my character take a fireball to the face. It's like, oh, I rolled really poorly and he's taking a fireball to the face. And then you can explore that. And it's like we've botched some like social roles of like, hey, like we need, like, if we don't like convince this character to let us through, things are going to go very poorly. We need this to happen. And then it doesn't, and it's not like we can go, okay, we're just going, we can just say, okay, we're going to ignore that, but it's a lot more fun if you don't ignore it and you say, okay, we failed, now what?
Exactly, and I think that's the nature of the group that you're in, is that you can acknowledge, oh, hey, we really should have passed this roll. There's no reason why this should not have, why we rolled really poorly. And if the GM's like, oh shit, I was expecting you to pass that, you can either, again, like, I find it much more interesting when you try and come back from that in story and you find ways around that. But then equally the DM or the GM can also either, hand of God, wave it through. I wasn't expecting you to fail that. I was, was looking more for the dice to indicate how the conversation went rather than a clear cut, oh God, you failed because you're so terrible at rolling.
Yeah, but you
We're
rolled a
going to
1
move
on the
on.
d20, so now we need to figure this out.
Exactly. And like you said, sometimes it can be fun to do it. And if it's really just going to be this was just going to be a conversation you were supposed to pass anyway. I wanted to have a guide. I'm going to pretend you rolled really low as opposed to completely failed.
Yeah, because like that's where rule 0 comes in. Of the rules are ultimately guidelines. Because there's been a few times where, like, especially like in Alien, where you're rolling on, oh, somebody took critical damage. What type of injury did they have? And we roll on a table. There's been numerous times where we'll look at the table and go, well, that makes absolutely no sense. We're going to go with this instead.
Yeah. And I think that, like you said, and every time you say it, it reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's the Pirates Code is like guidelines, really. And
Exactly.
and that's, I think, what's so magical about it is everyone is on the same page. You can really have a great experience with any kind of D&D and or D&D Pathfinder. Again, whatever. I'm going to get used to it eventually.
At this point, like, everybody, well, most people who get into the RPG hobby tend to go through at least a phase where it's like, it's not D&D, it's Pathfinder, or it's not D&D, it's Aliens, or whatever. At this point, I've pretty much just gotten to the Kleenex of it, where it's just, okay, yeah, we can call it D&D, and you'll understand what I'm saying. And
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, like, if I'm talking to someone in the shop as the staff person and I'm want them to get something that they're going to enjoy, I am not going to be upset if someone's like, I really want to get a Marvel comic with Batman in. I'm like, I'm not going to pick apart why that's wrong. I'm possibly not even going to address why it's wrong. I'm just going to show them a cool Batman comic.
Yeah, because
And
it doesn't help you or the person who might be genuinely interested and want to explore whatever they're talking about. They just don't have the technical parlance for it.
exactly, I'm not going to ruin someone's enjoyment and gatekeep right off the bat. Like, I'm going to get you in the door and then work on, like, hey, so now that you've read so many Batman stories, Batman's DC, which means that, and the only reason I would bring this up is Batman's DC because it means you're not going to find many comics where he's with Spider-Man. They do exist,
Yeah.
but they're very few and far between in comparison to Batman and whomever else he would typically go with. And I think, to your point, is that yes, D&D is not, it's becoming an all-encompassing term from things like Stranger Things and that specific game being popular. It doesn't mean that every game follows the D&D system, or in fact is even owned by the same people that do D&D. It's just at, like you said, it's Kleenex at this point.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure if Wizards of the Coast has any RPGs besides D&D at this point. I know they used to.
I don't think they do, but again, like, I'm also very aware of the fact that I'm not the expert in this.
Because it is, D&D is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Like, it's one of the few that has a major corporation behind it, because most RPGs are made by a crew that likely doesn't exceed like 10 people. Most, like, stuff like Pathfinder and D&D are very much exceptions to the rules, where they have an actual company and like money behind them. A lot of my favorite RPGs is literally like one or two people making and publishing the system all by themselves, and that's part of the fun that everybody tends to get into at some point with RPGs, where it's like, oh, like, I want to make my own rules, or I want to like create my own version of this, and then they'll go off and try to make their own version, and you can, because our tabletop RPGs are just as much of a craft as they are an art form. Like, if the rules are there to be followed, but they're also there to be inspiration and to be changed and modified and tossed out altogether, and you can put what else you want in that gap.
I think that is a fantastic way to bring the first episode of Ready Nerd Go to a close.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I know what we're like. We're going to keep talking for another hour.
Oh yeah, I've got so many things mentally queued up now.
Well, you know what? There is. This is the first episode. If you're more than welcome to come back again, and we can chat and we can go from there. So, folks, we're still working on an outro. We don't know how this is going to sound, but until next time, game on.
Game on.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.